All right, welcome back, everyone. Today is Wednesday. The time, at least I have now, is 4:59, so we're like just a few seconds early. But welcome to our weekly. Sean Hashmi. I'm a board-certified nephrologist, which is a kidney doctor, and I'm also a lifestyle and obesity medicine specialist. So, with that, today we're going to dive into a really interesting review paper that just got published, and what's really cool about this paper is that it actually goes through all of the variety of different diets that are available and it talks about the evidence behind them. So, specifically, we're going to pick seven of the most popular diets and go through the evidence that you need to know about them. What are they? We're going to talk about the Mediterranean diet. The vegan slash vegetarian diet. We're going to talk about low fat. We're going to talk about low carb as well as ketogenic. We'll talk about the paleo diet, and then we'll round it all out with the DASH and the mind diet, which sometimes gets a little bit confusing. And the hope here is that everyone starts to understand what are all of these names actually mean. Should I be following one of these diets? All diets? What is it that these diets have in common that you can take and start applying to your own life right away so you can start to see changes? And what I hope that you guys will see is as you listen to the talk, you're going to find that there are so many things in terms of diets that are actually similar concepts in all seven of these. And if you want to know what to really do and how to change your life, start to incorporate these seven concepts into your life, and you'll start to see really good results. And before we start, just want to say hi to everybody. Hi, Tyler. Hi, Barbara. Let's see, they're stepping forward. Hello. Rob said hello. Hi, Rob. Carmen Ross said hello. Teresa said hello. Hi, everyone. And for those of you guys on the other platforms, welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. And if you have comments, questions, feel free to put them in. We'll make sure that we go through them as the talk continues. So let's start with the most well-known diet, which is the Mediterranean diet. And what's important to note about Mediterranean diet, it's actually one of the most studied diets out there. So what happened was back in right after around World War II is really when a lot of this research on the Mediterranean diet started. There is, and I'm going to butcher the name, so I apologize, but Leland Alba, who was the director of a survey on the island of Crete, and the work that Lee was doing was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, but that was really the very first beginning into understanding the Mediterranean diet. And if you don't know what the Mediterranean diet is, it's basically olives, it's grains, it's legumes, fruits, vegetables, herbs. So a predominant plant-based diet. Where it differs a little bit is that there's limited quantities of things like goat meat, milk, fish. So it's not that the predominant portion is meat based products, but it's that meat based products are a small amount. And then what's interesting about Mediterranean diets, at least the traditional Mediterranean diets, is you'll find that bread, specifically whole grain bread, is often found at each meal. And there's all this controversy in the plant-based community around oils, but olive oil is actually a big portion of how they get their energy. So olive oil is present in most of the meals. Now, you may be familiar with the Ansel Keys seven-country study, and there's all sorts of debate on it. But what's important to understand about the Ansel Keys study is that his work was able to show that death from any cause, and specifically death from heart disease, were lower for which olive oil was the main source of dietary fat. So, in other words, as you started to follow more of a Mediterranean eating pattern, once again, it's predominantly plant based with some dairy and meat. What they found was that the rate of death from any cause and from heart disease was lower. Now, for all the criticism that the Ansel Keys study got, the importance to note is there are so many studies that have been done after the seven-country studies to validate the findings around the Mediterranean diet. And so, to sum them all up, there's an umbrella review. And so an umbrella review is basically they take all of the different meta-analysis, observational studies, randomized clinical studies, to bring everything together. And this umbrella review is looking at over 12 million participants. And what they found was that if you stick to a Mediterranean type diet, what you're going to find is the evidence shows there's a lower risk from dying from anything. There's a lower risk for cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, heart attacks, cancer, issues as far as brain decline, so neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, like dementia, diabetes. And the data also shows that when it comes to kidney health, you'll also find that that is improved as well by following a Mediterranean pattern. Now, the ultimate question is, well, what the is about this Mediterranean type of eating that makes it so effective? What's the mechanism on what happens? So it turns out that not only is it great in terms of lowering your blood lipids or the fats inside your blood, it's also very helpful in lowering the inflammatory and oxidative stress markers. We've talked about the fact that inflammation is one of the biggest drivers of just about every single chronic disease. And the goal really is how do we lower the inflammation in the body? Well, diet has a lot to do with it. Sleep has a lot to do with it. Exercise has a lot to do with it. And then, of course, doing mindfulness and any kind of activities, whether it's yoga, meditation, if you're a religious person, going to church, all of those things lower inflammation. In addition to that, the Mediterranean diet, of course, improves insulin sensitivity. It actually enhances how well the lining of your blood vessels work. It has a role in terms of preventing blood clots. So it's antithrombotic in nature. And then, of course, in terms of the blood supply to the brain, it may be helpful and may result in lowering the risk of chronic diseases. All right, diet number two. This is the vegetarian and vegan diets. So when you look at these dietary patterns, a vegetarian diet is a really broad term. In other words, it depends on how you define it. If you're somebody who's a lacto-vegetarian, means you're basically all plant-based, so you're vegan plus you have dairy. A lacto-ovo vegetarian is somebody who has, once again, dairy, which is lacto, and ovo meaning eggs. Otherwise, they don't do any animal products. Pescatarian is somebody who has fish. And then there's flexitarian. And the reason the term flexitarian is important is they're predominantly whole food plant-based, but they will have a little bit of things. So it allows that term to be used in the sense of having flexibility. And then strict vegan, of course, means only foods that are non-animal derived. So they are all plant foods. And the concept here is vegan being the most strict. Now, when we look at the data on both vegetarian and vegan diets, it's very similar to Mediterranean diet in that the effects are on improving insulin sensitivity, improving your metabolic markers, once again, lowering the risk of inflammation. And in terms of your gut microbiome, the data shows that you can actually improve the quality of your gut bacteria by doing more plants. Now, once again, you don't have to be somebody who's 100%, but even if you start to do a little bit, you'll find that short chain fatty acids, which are so helpful as far as the gut flora goes, and we've talked about them in a number of studies before, short chain fatty acid content in your gut actually increases the more you're able to do more plants in your diet. Once again, the flexitarian approach means you don't have to be 100. But what vegetarian, vegan diets, or even the Mediterranean diet so cool is the fact that you will find that a lot of things in your brain, how you think, how you feel, so things like depression improve when you start to do a predominantly whole food plant-based diet. Doesn't mean it's 100%. Whatever you can do helps. You lower things like C-reactive protein, IL-6, which are inflammatory. You find that certain things in your gut, like prevotella, which is helpful, start to increase. And of course, for weight loss, as long as you're not doing a vegan diet that's highly processed foods, for example, it's all potato chips. Yes, you're vegan, but at the same time, not the healthiest you can do. So overall, when you start to look at vegan diets, once again, you start to see that heart disease goes down, ischemic heart disease, cholesterol, diabetes, certain types of cancers, not all. If you watch the video that I did on nutrition, you'll see all the list of cancers that are specifically tied to vegan and vegetarian diets as far as improvement goes. The most important thing to remember is the more you go from a Mediterranean down the spectrum to a vegetarian diet, down the spectrum to a vegan diet, you have to understand that there is a risk of being vitamin B12 deficient. That's a very simple fix. Just go ahead and supplement with the B12. For myself and my patients, I always tell them to supplement with the B complex. This way, you're getting the thiamine, the folate. So you're getting all of those things and not just the B12 itself. So, in case any other deficiencies. Now, in patients who are very, very restricted, they can see that even things like B12 or even B2, niacin, iodine, zinc, calcium, potassium, selenium, can be deficient in folks that are on a very strict vegan type of diet. So it's important to watch out for it. Now, the third type of diet is the low fat diet. Now, low fat, it's funny because low fat gets a really, really bad rap because the concept was that if you put people on a low fat diet, you're reducing the caloric density, therefore, you should see a reduction in weight. Except Americans in general, they all have been gaining weight. In fact, obesity levels, the number of patients who are suffering from obesity as a disease, has been skyrocketing. That's why you see all of these pharmaceutical companies are starting to come up with different agents. We've talked about the GLP-1s. There's GLP-1s, GIPs. There's GLP-1 GIPs plus amylin and other types of agents that are going to be coming in the market. Then there's the other agents that are adding myostatin inhibitors so that they can try to preserve or build muscle while you're losing weight. But everybody forgets about the basics of starting to eat healthy. People don't really follow a low-fat diet. So it's a little from a misnomer as they think about reducing the fat percentage in their diet. They're actually starting to eat bigger plates, which means the total number of calories from fat has actually increased, not decreased. So, with low fat diets, what you want to understand is there isn't really a classic definition. In other words, there isn't one definition that says you got to know that this is considered low fat. But generally speaking, if you eat less than 30% of your total energy coming from fat, less than 30%, that's considered low fat. Very low fat diets, even simpler, it's 15% or less. So 30% or less, low fat, very low fat, 15% or less. The rest, of course, is coming from carbs or protein there, but fat wise, you're strictly lowering it. Now, part of the low fat diet is because a lot of animal products may be high in fat, you are going ahead and reducing a lot of the animal products. And a lot of vegetable oils are rich in fat, and so can things like nuts, avocados, etc. So all of these things are rich in fat, so you're trying to reduce them. When we look at the evidence behind it, what we find is that, for example, in women's studies, there's evidence that for breast cancer, a low fat diet may actually result in lower risk of death. So, once again, for low fat diets, there may be lower risk of death from breast cancer. But when it comes to weight loss, remember, for the first 6 months, you will find that in terms of weight loss, low carbs actually give you better weight loss than low fat diet does. What's important to understand is since the original term for low fat came out, the latest data shows that it's actually not just fat, it's the type of fat. So, once again, when we start to think about saturated fat, and there's subtypes to saturated fat. So, when we talk about saturated fat, That makes sense to reduce. But monos and polyunsaturated fats, it doesn't make sense to reduce. Same thing with things like medium chain triglycerides. They're actually burned right away for energy, and they're part of, for example, a ketogenic diet. So there's an interesting study, and this was a study that was published in 2023. It was looking at essentially Mediterranean versus low fat, very low fat, etc. And what they found was that for a Mediterranean diet, all cause mortality risk of dying from anything, dying from heart disease, stroke, or even having a non fatal, which means you didn't die, but you still had a heart attack. All of those things were significantly better with a Mediterranean diet. But if you did a low fat diet, the only two things that were significant was the risk of all cause mortality and just a non fatal heart attack. That's it. But in terms of stroke, in terms of the risk, in terms of dying from a heart attack, those were not significant from a low fat diet. So, once again, so far, the data is pointing towards Mediterranean lifestyle being the king or queen of diets. And once again, what is it? It's a predominantly plant based lifestyle with a little bit of other products added on, including things like healthy fats from olive oil. So then comes the question of what is it about low fat that's helpful? So once again, low fat also reduces inflammation in the body, also improves insulin resistance. And there may be some impact on things like reactive oxygen species that get produced. So once again, all of this stuff is improving. And somebody said the sound is going in and out. So if anybody else sees the sound going in and out, can you put that on the chat as well? And this way I can take a look to see what might be going on there. Okay, now comes the ketogenic diet. So, what do you want to know about the ketogenic diet and low carb diets? So, this thing that's important for keto and low carb diets is a couple of just basic items that you want to know about. First, the definition of a ketogenic diet is really about making sure that you're getting only 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates. And for those of you guys who are having difficulty with sound, yeah, I don't know why the sound might be going in and out, so I apologize. I'll make sure that if there's something you don't hear, just let me know, I'll repeat it. When it comes to keto, it's about 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. There's all sorts of varieties. There's what's 4-in-1, which is really the most strict type. So your fat content is 4 times as much as it is in terms of protein and carbohydrates. There's the 1-to-1. So the ratio is the grams of fat is equal to the grams of protein plus carbohydrate. So once again, grams of fat is equal to the grams of protein plus carbohydrates in the 1-to-1 version. Why does the 1-to-1 version exist? Because keto is very hard to stick to. And if you want to make it easier, you can do the 1-to-1 version of keto to make it lasting. Now, what the long term studies greater than 6 months show that if you're looking for weight loss, there isn't any better effects with plant based, with keto, with low fat, or any other diet. At the end of 12 months, it's all the same. So, in other words, what's the best diet for weight loss is the one that you can stick to. But the alternative question is what's the best diet for your health? That's the one that's predominantly whole foods. That's where all of these diets that I've talked about so far have in common that their base is a bunch of whole foods. Now, what makes keto so interesting is that when it comes to different mood disorders, depression, schizophrenia, cognitive disorders like Alzheimer's disease, um, other things that are happening, all of those things, what the data ends up showing is that ketogenic diets can actually be helpful in reducing the effects of mood disorders, reducing seizures, reducing migraines, and improving brain function. And how do they work? Nobody exactly understands what makes ketogenic diets effective, but what we do know is that they reduce sort of the excitability of these potassium channels inside your brain. So, in other words, you have these neurons that are constantly firing and they're way too excited. It's like your kids who had too much sugar. Think of your neurons like that. And for some reason, ketogenic diet, specifically creating ketones, reduces those channels that keep firing like crazy. Also, we see that the mTOR pathway that gets talked about a lot in a number of things, including cancer, gets reduced. So, keto diets are fascinating in that when it comes to health, there are some very specific benefits. How do you make a ketogenic diet healthier? Make it so that you are not super restrictive on your carbohydrates. You can use MCT oil. And when you are putting carbs, make sure they're healthy. And for fats, try to do mostly mono unsaturated and polyunsaturated fats instead of just jumping the gun and focusing on the unhealthy fats. So when people say, I can eat all the bacon I want, that is exactly what you should not be doing on a ketogenic diet. All right. The next one is a paleo diet. Now, paleo is the one diet that people confuse all the time. So, when we talk about hunters and gatherers, our ancestors, based on studies using isotopes, they were basically gatherers and then hunters. They weren't hunters predominantly and then gatherers. So, in other words, the predominant portion of their diet was coming from fruits, roots, vegetables, and then there was a little bit of things like fish, some animal meat from wild game, and sometimes honey. What's fascinating is if you look at some of the studies, they will say that the folks from the Paleolithic era were getting close to 100 grams of fiber a day. It was a massively high fiber diet. So when we talk about the Paleolithic era, it was a lot of vegetables. Now you can think of it as it might have been closer to a low carb diet, just in the sense of they didn't have so much of their stuff coming from carbs, but it was a lot of vegetables coming in. The reason this matters is when people talk about paleo, there isn't one definition. What's important to understand is it's not hunters and gatherers, it's gatherers and hunters. And that's a very, very important distinction to remember. Now, two other diets that you really want to understand and know about. The first one of them is the DASH diet. So far, just to recap a little bit, we talked about Mediterranean, we talked about vegan, low fat, low carb slash ketogenic, paleo diet. The last two diets are DASH and the mind diet. And I don't want you guys to get confused with these terms. So feel free to watch this again. But the DASH diet, as you know, stands for dietary approaches to stop hypertension. It was basically to look at can a diet improve blood pressure? And the answer was yes. It improved blood pressure by about 5.5 points systolic, which is about half the dose of a traditional blood pressure medication. So, what was in the DASH diet? Of course, they focused on low sodium and lots of fruits and vegetables. They had some dairy products in there. But what was important to note was there's low saturated fat, number one. Number two is there's low sodium. So the diet, because it's fruits and vegetables, it's rich in potassium, it's rich in magnesium, it's rich in calcium, but of course it's low in sodium. And because they have so many fruits and vegetables, what you're getting is lots of fiber and you're getting lots of proteins with it. Now, there's an umbrella review. Once again, umbrella, they take all the studies, put them together, and what they had was about almost 1 million people. And they found that if you were to stick to the DASH diet, your risk of heart disease would go down, your risk of heart attacks would go down, stroke and diabetes would go down. So I hope by now you're seeing a pattern. Every one of the diets that I've talked about that lowers the risk of heart disease, that lowers the risk of diabetes, that lowers the risk of stroke, that's helpful for brain health, they all involve whole foods, lots of fruits, lots of vegetables. Don't get caught up on the details. The details make it very, very confusing. So when you talk about, for example, Mediterranean versus DASH, it's just that in the Mediterranean diet, you have some fish, you have some lean meats, right? So those are just the small differences. But other than that, the foundation of all of these diets is a predominant whole food diet. Now, once again, we're not saying 100%. We're saying wherever you are, we'll meet you. So if you got Mediterranean and you got Dash and you were to put them together, what do you get? You get this new name, which is called the Mind Diet. So what's the Mind Diet? It stands for Mediterranean Dash Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. And basically, all it is taking plant foods, so whole grains, fruits and vegetables, beans, nuts, and specifically focusing more on berries and green leafy vegetables. So, mind focuses more on berries and green leafy vegetables. It still tells people to restrict red meat and to minimize saturated fat, but it uses olive oil. So, remember the type of fat matters. So, it uses olive oil. It recommends fish more than once a week and things like poultry more than twice a week. So, what's the data? There's a couple of studies. There's a meta analysis in 2023, and it basically said that the Mind Diet was associated with better brain function. In other words, on simple memory tasks, they did better. And in terms of if you followed it to later in life, you actually did better. There's another study in the New England Journal of Medicine that basically showed that when they looked at MRIs, they didn't really see a difference between mind and essentially those that did a little bit of calorie restriction. So, what's the take home message on mind? It's very simple. You look at Mediterranean, you look at plant based, you look at vegan, you look at low fat, and all of those things are talking about starting to add more whole foods. The rest of it, we can argue till we're blue in the face. But if you take those basic concepts and you start to use those, you can absolutely start to change your life. So remember, at the end of the day, sleep matters, exercise matters, gratitude, kindness, and making sure that you're taking time for yourself matters, and eating a predominantly whole food diet matters. And then just going to the questions, I see a last question which was stepping forward said, what about soy milk if they have a history of breast cancer from my mother, moderate CKD? Soy is awesome. Remember, it's a phytoestrogen. It does not have estrogen-like properties. It can act like an estrogen or an anti-estrogen. So in other words, the data is actually quite remarkable. I use soy milk myself. I use it for my kids. We've been doing it since they were young. They absolutely love it. And now Costco carries, and I know, I'm not getting paid by Costco, don't worry, but Costco carries the unsweetened version of soy milk. So if you're looking for soy milk, you can go to Costco. They have the unsweetened version. All right, going to a couple of questions real quickly. Are there any special precautions in MCT oil? Just remember, even if you have chronic kidney disease, the big thing with MCT oil, it is going to cause your GI or your stomach to be upset, and you can get diarrhea from it. So keep that in mind. That's the biggest problem. And then let's see. Which plants have the highest iron content? Carol Wong asked. So, Carol, we actually have that. Remember, Michelle Crosmer, who's my partner with the Plant Based Kidney Health, she has all sorts of amazing handouts. They're all free right on her website and on her Instagram channel. So, take a look at that because it's already there, done for you. Let's see, over here on Instagram, can these diet prolong the life of a transplanted kidney? Absolutely, yes. So remember, and this is Nasreen, when we look at what causes things to die? The concept here is it's inflammation. It's the overactive immune system sometimes attacking it. It's the fact that weight, blood sugars, and of course, blood pressure are the three biggest things that will kill your natural kidney. And of course, they will kill the transplanted kidney. Um, let's see, next question that I see on here. And if I forget any question, just post it again in the chat so I can make sure I address them for you. Uh, Let's see. Carmen Ross said CKD, diabetic nephropathy, between stage 3, stage 4. Doc prescribed Jardians. I got allergic reaction, extreme itchiness. Can you give other SGLT recommendation? Um, that, let's see, that is a low allergy reaction. So a couple of things, Carmen, this is where you want to talk to your doctor and find out, what was the dose? Is it possible to try a lower dose? Is it possible the allergic reaction was due to something else? Don't know. If truly that's the case and you're allergic to Jardians, don't use it. There's other medications. For example, some of the new data that's come out on GLP-1s. We presented the data from the FLOW trial. I think it was just 2 or 3, 4 weeks ago. I can't remember, but if you go to YouTube/Self Principle, you'll see on there the video that I did where I talked about the FLOW trial, specifically talking about the role of GLP-1s in reducing protein in the urine, but also definitely take a step back, Karen, and ask yourself the question, is there anything else from a lifestyle perspective that you ought to be doing? Take a look at it so you can fix it. Let's do a couple more questions real quickly. And I apologize for the sound. I am speaking right next to the microphone so you guys can hear. And then Din said, are lentils or pulses good for kidney? Absolutely. It doesn't matter if it's IgA nephropathy or any other kind of thing. You will find that lentils are an awesome type of food as far as that goes. All right, guys. I know the time is 5:30 now. Once again, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us every week. And the best compliment you can ever give me is just share the word, spread it to your friends. I hope this was helpful for you. These are the 7 diets. And then for those of you guys who are brand new, remember the most important message I always try to give is try to lead with kindness. Kindness is the most important thing. We're on this planet for such a short amount of time. And when you're a kid, you can be anything. And because you can be anything, why not be kind? So, with that, thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope this helps you out. There's nothing for me to gain from these except to be able to just say is I have the opportunity to help. So why not step out there and help some people? I will see everyone next week. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join me today. And I hope you guys learned something good. Bye, everyone.